course.
Well, have any of you guys read um, Lynch, The Image of the City? Have you guys seen that? That's good. I'll send you the PDF on that. Lynch was actually, um, he was an ethnographer, but he's a secular guy. He was actually learning how to map communities um, secularly for businesses and other things of how to connect in a city. And but the good thing about what he's done, it has some application that's tremendous for church planting and for existing churches as well. Um, when I began to read over what he had out, he did a lot of work in North Carolina, um, but Luke 19 came to mind for me. Luke 19:41 and 42. Jesus, it says, when he drew near, talking about Jesus, he saw the city and he wept over it, saying, "Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes." Jesus knew enough about the city, knew enough about Jerusalem that it caused him to weep. And I really think that's where we've got to get to a place where we know the city enough to where we know we have the passion to weep over it. A couple things I want to just hit real quickly on mapping. Spent a lot of time, as I told you, in New York City, Boston, and Toronto, and I'm going to bring some of those principles in because that's where I've spent a lot of my work for the last several years, and now just getting traction back here in the state with that. But a lot of guys go into New York City, they go into Boston, they go into Toronto, but in particular New York, and they'll plant their church or be they're in the early process of planting a church, and they'll say, "Man, we're gonna reach New York City. That's our goal. Our goal is we're gonna reach New York City." Well, within a 75-mile radius of Times Square, like literally where 42nd and 7th cross, if that's your starting point, within that 75-mile radius, there's 16 million people. Well, there's no way you're going to reach 16 million people. So, okay, if you back it down even to how many people live in the 5 boroughs of New York City, just inside the city limits, there's 8 million people. Well, so then we have guys that say, well, all right, I'm going to reach Queens. Well, that's 2 million people. So you're not really, we're not really narrowing it down. But then it starts to look a little more like what we're looking at here. Somebody rolls into Winston-Salem, they roll into Greensboro, they roll into Raleigh, they roll into Charlotte, and say, I'm going to reach this city for Christ. Well, there's only a few people, a handful of people that I know that can even have impact outside of their geographic location, and I mean like blocks, much less have a citywide impact. And so the first thing I would tell you is when we're talking about mapping, we need to start looking at what really is our community, because Winston-Salem is not your community. That's a city, and certainly we want to have a multiplication idea that where we can reach the whole city of Winston-Salem. But if you come in with that approach, it's really going to be tough. You're probably going to hit your head against a lot of places. So what we've seen in Queens that guys have finally started doing is that where are those pockets in the city that
Recording in progress.
define themselves? Just in Queens, there's like 25 different communities, and they identify themselves that way. They don't say they're from Queens; they say from Woodside. Winston-Salem, I compare, and the reason I'm bringing up Queens, Winston-Salem to me is the closest thing to Queens in our state. Winston-Salem divides itself up by communities. People will tell you, I'm from Walltown. They won't say they're from Winston-Salem. Now, eventually, if you dig down deeper, they'll say I'm from Pocktown. I'm from Old Town. I'm from wherever. I'm from this city. And so what I would encourage you guys is, before you even map the city, really to define the city. Who is it that I'm trying to reach? Am I trying to reach either geographically, I'm trying to reach this community right here? Am I trying to reach right here? Am I trying to reach this community over here? Who is the community that I'm trying to reach? Once you start defining that, then you can start to map your city. You won't be able to map your city if you don't know how to define your city, and that goes into a lot of that is discovery and just figuring out, talking to locals. One of the things when I was pastor, I moved down to, I say Fayetteville. It was actually Hope Mills. Hope Mills is a little town that used to be a mill town. They had a big mill that sat on the river, and that's all that defined the town. That's why the town was created. Well, being from Greensboro area, I rolled into Hope Mills thinking, well, it must be Fayetteville. So I started talking, we're going to reach Fayetteville, we're going to talk about Fayetteville, and a wise old guy in the church pulled me aside and said, son, you're not in Fayetteville, you're in Hope Mills. I said, yeah, but we can throw a rock to the city limits of Fayetteville. He said, I don't care what you throw. This is not Fayetteville. It's Hope Mills. It's totally different. And so then we began to define, okay, what does that look like? The reality is that you're going to have major pulses that affect smaller communities. Everything that happens in Winston, not only does it affect downtown Winston, it affects all these places. It affects Clemens, it affects Louisville, it affects all of these places. But we have to be aware of those things. When we're talking about mapping our towns, our cities, our locations, we have to realize what are those locations. Now that's changing, and it changes every day depending on where you're at. Winston-Salem, Greensboro, High Point are all going through things like gentrification. They're wiping out big segments of populations that towns used to look this way, and now they look differently because developers are coming in. They're buying up the property, they're selling it. And so this process, before we even get into it, this process it's never done. And you always need to be mapping your community because it changes. What you're going to hear in chapel this morning is that church that was created at Albertson Road, the reality is all the signs were there. Albertson Road doesn't even exist anymore. A train track came through, cut off Albertson Road, so they renamed the road. It's now Blandwood and Prospect. But the church said, no, we're Albertson Road Church. Well, they stayed Albertson Road Church, and in more ways than one. They never wanted to change their community. They didn't even know what their community looked like by the time they ended up turning the keys over to all these other churches. They had no idea because they had failed to continue mapping their community. So what does it look like to map your community? Well, the first thing is you got to open your eyes. When Paul walked in to Athens, he began to see what his community looked like. And Acts 17:16 tells us that he went in, he was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was provoked, and he saw the city was full of idols. That may sound simplistic, but I'm not sure, even dealing with some of our newer church planners, that they even know what their city looks like. They don't even know that their city's full of idols. Or they may think their city is full of idols, or it was full of things that were in the place they came from. That was my problem when I landed in Hope Mills. I was bringing a perspective of, I thought Hope Mills, because it was a mill community, was just like the little farming community I grew up in just 10 miles down the road from here. Those were two totally different places. And so when we walk in, we have to have our eyes open, we have to be ready to look and see what's out there. So again, you'll find all that. I'll send Dustin this PDF of Kevin Lynch. It'll give you a good idea of this. But one of the things that is important is how do we define what our community is? And one of the things as a new church planner moving into an area, or I would even say, I think it's even harder sometimes when you're from an area to map a community, because it's almost like a Christian who's been reading the Bible all their life. When the pastor starts preaching from a familiar passage, you tune it out because you're like, I know that story. When you walk into a new area, your eyes are open to something new. And so it's a little easier, I think, to start mapping it because you're not bringing the biases. Now, you need to bring local knowledge if you can, or find it, but ultimately, discovering local knowledge tends to be more profitable even than knowing local knowledge.
So essentially, kind of what you're getting at is, if we have lived in a community so long, we have the restaurants we like, we have the social places we like, we have those. That's really all we go to, even though we drive right past a dozen other things that we've never really looked at because we go. That makes sense.
Yeah, one of the things I would encourage you is there's two perspectives of community, and especially in North Carolina, if you live in the I-85, I-40 corridor, there are people that are from there and there are people who are coming there. And those two worlds are dramatically different in North Carolina. They're starting to merge a little bit. It's been long enough, especially in the larger cities, Winston-Salem, Greensboro, Raleigh, Durham, Charlotte. But we still have this that is very much present. It's those that are from there have one perspective, and those that are coming there have a totally different perspective. And your job, really, if you want to prioritize as a church planner, you're really looking for those that are coming there more than you are those that are from there. And why do I say that? Those that are from there are Bible Belt people. That doesn't mean they're all Christians, but they have a tremendous access to the gospel, or probably had historically. Those that are coming there, what we're finding more and more in North Carolina is those that are coming here they've had very limited access to the gospel. So it doesn't mean you ignore those that are there. Don't hear me say that. But we have over 300 churches in the Triad alone that are trying to reach people who are from there. We don't have that many churches that are trying to reach people who are coming here. And so, to me, that's where church planting is so critical, is that those that are coming here, there aren't that many people reaching them. And so when pastors of traditional churches tell me, why do we need more churches? Well, the reason we need more churches, and again, I'll share some of this in chapel, is because most of our churches are geared toward, are set up for, are designed for those that are from an area instead of those that are coming to an area. And we can leave that out if we're not careful. So what are some things you need to look for? First thing, and Lynch calls these things paths, but I just call them path or routes or busyness of the city. Where are those things? Where's the source of the people coming in and out of a community? Businesses, if you'll notice, where are the businesses? Where are the new businesses building in your community? Walmart spends millions of dollars figuring out pathways in a community. They want to know where it is that people will have the greatest access to locate them. Now, why is that important? It's important because depending on the style of church that you're going to plant, you're going to need to know where people travel, where people are accessing. Why does so many of our churches find their ways in certain places and parts of the community? Well, in the days in which they were planted 40, 50, 60, sometimes 100 years ago, they were on the walking path of those that lived in the community. And so people pass them by every day. If you're going to plant a brick and mortar church, you're going to need to know where those pathways are. Now, there's challenges to that. Pathway property is more expensive than non-pathway property for a reason. Location is everything, right? But you need to know where those things are. You also need to know where boundaries are. What are some things that you can look for boundaries? What is it that divides a community? In Winston-Salem, if you go on 52, as you're coming down Business 40 and you hit 52, 52 divides communities. I took a group a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, a group of college students over in Winston-Salem. We walked around a lot of the city. And literally, and Winston's probably the best example of this, literally railroad tracks and highways will divide whole communities. So on one side of the track, you may have a community that's 50, 60, 70, 80% African American. Literally just 500 yards, the community completely switches and it becomes Hispanic, or it's white, or it's whatever. If you're a church planner and you're going in, you're going to target an area, you need to know who you're targeting, and you need to know those needs that are involved in there. The Hispanic community in Winston-Salem has a tremendous amount of needs that are different than the African American community. They have a whole lot of different challenges. There's a lot of different. So if you go in with a strategy and you're just going to let's say you choose 52 as your place where you're going to do it, and then draw a circle, you're going to miss the boat, because you're going to be trying to reach people, so many different people, that you're not going to reach anybody. You also need to know where it is that people interact. We call those points of interest. Gone are the days where you can engage people where they live, if they're in homes. And really, in many places, apartment complexes, if you don't live in those areas. So that's the caveat on that. If I want to reach into an apartment community, I need to live into the apartment community. You can't go around knocking on apartment doors anymore. You can't go in neighborhoods knocking on doors anymore. If we're going to reach people where they live, then we have to live there as well. So I would encourage you, as you're mapping your city, find, if you're not going to live, target the community or the neighborhood in which you're living, which I highly recommend that no matter what your church planting strategy is, your disciple making strategy should always start where you live. But as you're planting the church, you need to say, okay, where are people hanging out? Not where they live. We call those points of residence. Points of residence are not the best place to start, because if you're not in a point of residence, you're going to look like the creepy outsider coming in. And suspicious behavior. You walk into my neighborhood, knocking on doors. People are suspicious. It's not going to be an attractive thing for you to knock on the door, open the door, and go, "Hey, let me tell you about Jesus." They're going to call the cops, or they're going to say, "Those are those weird people. I don't want anything to do with it." So we find the points of interest. Just kind of off the top of your head, let's make this interactive. I've done a lot of talking. What are some points of interest that you can think of? Where do people hang out?
Walmart.
Walmart, good. All right, yeah. Walmart has become the church, what the church was in the early days.
I was thinking of like a YMCA.
YMCA is good. Yep.
Well, I'm thinking I just passed the place earlier on my way here. I mean, you have that little section of downtown Winston where you have Jimmy John's or whatever it is. You have
4th
places,
Street?
yeah, you have places right in there where there's people constantly right there. Of course, you have bars and everything, or
Sure.
Sports bars, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, especially in like an urban downtown setting, I think
Yeah.
it's like a 4th Street, because they even block off 4th Street, because there are a lot of bars and clubs and restaurants. They block it off the second Sunday of the month, or every other Sunday. They block them off in the summer, and you can have the whole road. I mean, they have like a little mini festival all throughout the summer in that one area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
We still have
Okay.
I think in a small sense, in like coffee shops, because you have a lot of regulars who kind of spend a lot of time there.
Now, that's a good transition. There's two types of points of interest, and I want to encourage you to think about this second when you're talking about mapping your community. In the old days, and by the old days I mean 10 years ago, in some churches, what they do currently, they have a huge, let's say that community has like a big, in Hope Mills we used to have a big 4th of July celebration. So we consider that a point of interest. That lots of people come in there. So we would go in, we would set up a tent and do like every good Baptist church does, hand out water and cheap pens at the break. So that's what we did. You know, we pay 50 cents, hand out a pen, hand out water. We'd have some game that we created to draw people in, and da 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 da. Okay, you're going to interact with a lot of people like that. I want to take it from that though, and let you think about it a different point of interest. Walmart is a great point of interest if you're the Salvation Army and you're trying to collect money in the red cap. Why is that? Because people walk in, most people get at Christmas time either in a generous spirit or they feel guilty and they drop in money. They don't want to walk by the guy. Or that's why the Boy Scouts, the local basketball, football teams, Girl Scouts, that's why everybody's at Walmart. It's not a great church planning strategy to consider Walmart a place to go into. Why is that? Well, everybody goes to Walmart. and there's not a lot of opportunity for engagement. There's not a lot of opportunity for relationships. So as we start mapping out what are my points of interest as a church planner, I need to start investing myself into. We need to start looking at what are the coffee shops where there's going to be regulars. What are the restaurants where there are regulars? What are the establishments, whether they're bars, well, I mean, that you can debate that in your own heart, how you need to settle that out. But where are those places where lost people come on a regular basis and build relationships? This may go out of line, so if it is, Dustin, knock me back in. But
just do it.
All right, okay. We need to find where the Cheers bars are, where people have community, and that may be in a coffee shop. I'm not telling you to hang out in bars, but what I'm telling you is, if you remember that concept, those people went there to find community. We've got to find those places, those points of interest where people go to find community, because ultimately what we're trying to do is make disciples and build a community that is different than the kind of community they're trying to find elsewhere. People go to bars, we've got in town, we used to live downtown Fuquay Marina, and there was a coffee and wine bar that overnight became the community gathering place for people looking for community that didn't have it anywhere else. And so we've got to find those places where people hang out. You'll notice in Bojangles, there's a community of older people in every Bojangles in the southeastern United States. That's because people aren't finding community anywhere else. Now, most of those older people in Bojangles go to church, but they go to churches that don't have community, and so they go find community somewhere else. If you tried to change their church to make it have community, they'd run you out. So anyhow, it's a side issue. But finding those points of interest are very critical if you're going to be able to impact. You want to be the guy that when you walk in the door, they know who you are, and they know that you love them eventually, and you're trying to share the gospel with them. Don't find the Christian points of interest if you're trying to plant a church. We don't need to be in the business of dislodging people from their Christian community to put them into another Christian community. What we need to do is find places where we can engage in those. So that brings me to the next mapping point. Lynch calls these nodes. I call them where people, if you look at the live, work, and play model, it's where people play. What is it that drives the community in that community? What is it that is the underlier? In the community where we used to live, it was sports. It was kids' sports. I had over 500 kids in a town of 15,000 that were involved in sports in any given weekend. That's a huge number of kids. It's not, I don't know how many kids were in the community, probably 6,000, but probably close to 10% of the children living in that community were involved in sports. You add 2 parents to that, we know that's not completely accurate, but 2 parents and throw in some grandparents, and you may have 25% of a population at a particular point of interest every day. So what is it that you can do there? You can coach, you can show up, you can, mapping out what are those areas. If you have a core team of 5 couples and you guys begin to influence those communities and find out what it is that's there and what they need, then you can begin to look further at those mapping. And then I would just take it a little step further, because mapping is one thing, but then going into how do we then start engaging people. And that's a critical part of our mapping, because we have to look at, as we're mapping, what are the people that are living here in our community that are not being reached with the gospel. And that's the people that we need to not only find, so that would be the intent of our mapping, but then how are we going to go about engaging them. So let me just stop there as far as mapping goes. Any questions along that? And then we'll get into sort of how do we get into this a little deeper. All of that stuff you can do just driving around town, just start asking people, looking for things, asking questions, spending time being regular at places. but I want to get a little deeper of what we can offer to church planners, what we do offer to church planners to try to get them deeper into the community. Anything else?
You have a point of interest. You say like where the regulars go, they're going for a sense of community. So if they already have a sense of community, how do you insert yourself into that?
Yeah, that's the hard thing, but I think it's most of those places, and this is, I don't mean this to sound as indictment as it's going to sound, but most of the secular communities are pretty open. People come there for a sense of when they got there, they were looking for something, and they know other people that are coming are looking for something. And so, for the most part, just inserting yourself into the everyday life of that community is good. Also, in where we live, every day that goes by that you don't try to create community in the neighborhood in which you live, the harder it will become to create community. And so, ideally, moving into a community is your best opportunity to try to build community with those around you. Because if you let major time go by, then the chances are less likely. Now, in these places where you can go, whether they be a coffee shop, whether they be whatever, that time is not as critical. You can kind of insert at any point.
Okay.
So.
Cool.
I had a international missions church planting professor at Southeastern who, knowing that he had a class that in his particular class had a lot of North American church planters in it, even though it was an international class, he made a really, I think, good, profound statement that kind of related to community mapping. But he said, especially in the Southeast where we are, where church is, even the people who aren't Christians and don't go to church or anything here know what happens at 11 a.m. on Sunday mornings. They know where, the Christians are, kind of thing. He said, what if, when you're planning a church and you're moving in, part of your community mapping was actually go at 11 a.m. on Sunday and find out what are people doing at Sunday at 11 a.m. He's like, so maybe your church service starting out doesn't need to be Sunday at 11. Maybe it needs to be Saturday night or Sunday night or some other time. He's like, but Sunday at 11, especially in the Southeast, and this is not really, won't be so much true in probably Northeast, Canada, Southwest, Northwest, but it's definitely true of the Southeast. And so even those kind of factors really play into how you're mapping as well. But find out where people are spending time and even what time of day they're doing it. A lot of people are out shopping at 11 a.m. on Sunday. I did a few things. Found out there's a good number of people at Walmart on Sunday at 11. I realized. And then K&W has a whole lot of people at Sunday at 12:05 because all the church people get out and they go eat. And the other crowd, they know not to go. I had some waitress and waiter friends who were like, we know the church crowd when they come in because they don't tip. And so we know them, and we know that there's a lot of people who avoid coming at Sunday at 11 who aren't Christian because they know that's when the Christians are going to be and they're rowdy. And that's the reputation that we had at least one restaurant that I was familiar with. So anyways.
Well, and I would just, as you move from mapping to engagement, the 5 questions we sort of ask people to consider is, who are the people in my community? You just ask, if you can't off the top of your head identify who the people are in your community, then you can't move any further. You really can't. You can't get past that. What motivates people in your community? That's going to be different for every community. When are people available? Dustin just said it. When is it? In the Northeast, if you try to do something, if you try to have a church gathering on a Saturday or Sunday, especially the further you get away from New York City, Queens, Long Island, if you try to do that in young, professional, upcoming family areas here in North Carolina, you're not going to get anybody. And that's because people are working 50, 60, 70 hours a week. Both parents are working if they're married, they have kids, and they are not going to take out the little bit of time that they have with their family to come to a gathering for the first time. So we need to find out, when are people available? I know in most towns in North Carolina, whenever kids' sports are going on, that's when people are available. People are bringing their lawn chairs out at 7 o'clock at night. They're sitting around watching their kids practice. That's when they're available. My wife and I had an opportunity when my youngest son was playing football in little pee-wee football. We had a group of about 12 people, and literally it turned into prayer meeting sometime. And these people were not believers at all. They were mostly from the Northeast, and they found out I was a pastor, and one of the lady had a heart condition. One of the lady, her mother was dying, and we just every week, and we just started the conversation. Hey, what's going on, guys? Anything that you'd like for me to pray about this week? And that's what it was. That's when they were available. Where do people make themselves available? Again, those are those points of interest. Where is it that people are available? And then ultimately we have to ask the question, how am I going to engage them? What is it that I'm going to do to insert myself into community? And not as a project. I hope we can get that out of our minds. People are not projects. They're people that God loves, and we need to love them too. But how am I going to engage the community? I'm going to give you some real life practical stuff this morning of how you're going to hear the word re-enter the community a lot this morning in chapel, because that's what the people who are now meeting at what used to be Albertson Road, their whole mindset was, how do we re-enter this community and engage people? For church planning, it may be how do you enter the community for the first time. And just because you're physically in the community does not mean you're in the community. And that's a big no. That's something we really got to get out of our minds. That because we have a physical building there does not mean we're in the community. Right. Let's talk a little bit about some resources, and I'll just do it real quickly. And any of you guys that as you start to plant, or as you begin thinking, does God want me to plant, or even if you end up in a traditional church, we offer a thing. We bought into a product called Mission Insight several years ago. I brought one with me just so you can kind of look at it. This is actually the Mission Insight from Albertson Road, where the church is. But we can give you 100 pages. I just printed out the quick one, which is 11 pages. But it'll break down for you everything from where people shop, what people spend their money on. This is the same kind of report that like Target and Walmart and places like that. They get a lot of their same information from the same people we get it in. And really figuring out who is it that lives in this community and what kind of churches do we, from a larger perspective, do we need to have. We have one of our areas over in Greensboro that we have a lot of activity going on in right now. And in that community, we have some of the richest people in Greensboro living, and we have some of the poorest. We have some of it's a heavy Anglo area. Most of the people there are white, but we also have 2 people groups that are from unreached countries that are living in that community.
Wow.
And so for somebody, again, going back to the beginning, somebody goes in and goes, I'm going to reach this area. One person, they're not going to reach them. So the statistics, these things don't help you map your community. Let me take that back. This isn't mapping your community. So don't ever think you can map your community from a computer. What this stuff does is it helps you see what you need to be looking for as you're out in your community. This is a foundation piece for getting into the community. So what are some things about? Let's just talk some. What are some things as you start to think about church planning? What are some things that you can think of resources that you may be at this point saying, and how do I get a hold of those resources to begin engaging? What do I need to map? What do I need to engage in my community?
I think these are some of the questions on your prospectus document. If you have that pulled up. I gave them a Google Map project this week to do, and it really was just because they were doing Detroit and they're doing places not here. So really all we have is Google Maps and a lot of Google Maps and Wikipedia, and that's right. That's kind of what we do now for the non on the ground kind of thing. So we asked them some questions related to what are religious percentages, age of the population, average income, all those type of things. And we this week they're doing like a kind of an anchoring address of, okay, pick this address in a 2-mile radius. Do you think 2 miles, when you're mapping a community, do you have like a recommended, like when you do the mission insight, is there a certain radius that you say try to keep it most likely in this?
The deeper into the city you get, the more refined it needs to be. Like Albertson Road is still in the inner core of High Point, but it's sort of on the edges of the inner core. So we do a 1-mile radius around Albertson Road. If it's inside, like downtown, we do a half-mile or quarter-mile radius.
Right.
Just kind of give you an example. The Upper West Side of Manhattan, 72nd Street and Broadway, there are more people living in a 4-block area than in most of the cities in the United States of America. And so you can't get outside of a 4-block radius in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Now, if you're in Clemens, you need to do 2, 3, maybe even 4-mile radius, because that's where you're going to be looking at. So the further you get away from the core of the city, the larger the radius needs to be.
Yes, remember Jason Leffler from Tapestry there in South Fork. They did a 3-mile radius because it's more community, spread out. For the purpose of this class, I'm having them do a 2-mile. What they're going to be listing is finding schools, finding community centers, finding kind of multicultural venues beyond just there's a Mexican restaurant. Is there a Mexican grocery store, Hispanic grocery store? Is there an Italian grocery? Those type of things let you know, oh, there must be a good number of people if they have their own grocery store. Maybe there's a population here. Some other things, community centers, schools, of course, hangout spots, maybe must have the point of interest. So you were asking kind of about what are some of those things to kind of help find. Do the mission insights, will it also give things like the average income and religious preference and all that sort of things?
Yeah, it has just a couple things. It has school-age children, how many people in that area have school-age children, families with children, how educated people are, what the diversity of the community is, what their religiosity is. And then on that sheet, we actually provide, there's 4 different documents. We actually have a 12-page religious summary of the community. So you can get how many Buddhists are there, how many Muslims are there. And this is mostly self-reported. So you're going to probably have a little bit of a lower when it comes to Roman Catholic, especially if it's a high Hispanic area. The reporting is going to be down on that. So
let me ask you, because these guys here, they're all actually involved in different ministries right now, and some in the class very much interested in planting a new work, some in revitalizing and remissioning, some in replanting. And so really community mapping, as you kind of mentioned, you never stop doing it. And I think that's why we do have a lot of dying churches, that the community changed in 5, 10, 15 years, and no one really, they didn't adapt to the community. They stopped exegeting their neighborhood, so to speak. If these guys were planting in North Carolina, or even remissioning a church here in North Carolina, the studies that you do with the Mission Insights, is that free to them? Is there a cost for a planter in North Carolina to do that?
It's free. You just have to just get in touch with me, and I can run the reports for you and send them to you. Our contract covers anybody that comes through us. So you guys we can get those for you.
Because we do have one group that is doing Chapel Hill. Is that something they could even email and say, hey, can you give us this neighborhood in Chapel Hill? What if it was outside of North Carolina?
We can do Virginia, and we can do South Carolina, and we can do New York because of our partnership.
Okay.
And probably if it's just a couple, they usually are pretty good about just saying, hey, we've got somebody from North Carolina going to, and they're pretty good about opening it up. I can't run it, but Shirley, who administrates this, she can run it.
Okay.
So,
because we do have a group who is doing Charleston. Charlie here, their group is doing Charleston, South Carolina. Derek's is doing Chapel Hill, and Matt's over there. They're doing Detroit. We have one of our online students who's there, and so we've kind of picked cities near some place where our students are living, and so they have Team Detroit. I know that the Southern Baptist throughout each state, does pretty much each state convention have these kind of resources to church planters? Like if the Michigan, let's say they want to they want to get some studies of Detroit, maybe they have it maybe not Mission Insight, maybe a different group. But is that typically, you kind of see that pretty broadly, that most groups are using these type of tools?
Yeah, if it's in places like Michigan, if it's north of Virginia, or if it's west of the Mississippi River, you probably have to go through the North American Mission Board, and we can do that because state conventions there just don't have the resources. So, but we, we can certainly, we got the connections to get, we can get you in touch with the right people to get that. There's a coordinator in all of what we call the SEND North American cities. There's a coordinator there that has access to all of that in those big cities. It pretty much, if you look at I tell people it's pretty much a SEND city if it's not in the South and it's on the USA Today weather map. So those are
pretty
the major
much
cities. So we do have those connection points there.
Very cool. Well, we're out of time for class period today, but Mike, thank you so much.
Yeah,
This has
no
been,
problem.
I think it's been personally beneficial for me. As I was telling the group last time, I am doing the same mapping and perspectives that they're doing. I'm doing it for Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Calvary Baptist here in Winston are developing a partnership to plant there through NAM, and they've approached us about maybe having some of our students do mission trips, maybe do some internships, that sort of thing. And so they have a community. So if you see, and those of you watching will see this on the screen. What I did just over the weekend, I created the Google map like what you guys are doing, and what I did was you can actually, with the Google Map tools, you can use these lines and you can actually map out the community. So I basically just picked the red star is Panorama Hills. It's right in the middle where Calvary Baptist here wants to plant their first church, because there's 44,000 people living within a mile and a half of here. And it's one of the fastest growing neighborhoods of Calgary, and it's one of the most unreached, only about 2% evangelical. And so I put a star there. That blue dot is like a local cinema. I was kind of mapping out some of the shopping centers, that sort of thing. But you can, in the Google map, which is really kind of neat, you can map out. So I picked the highway. That's usually a dividing line. So I picked the highway and some of the natural roads and barriers and kind of did this. And another cool thing, you can do the little measure distance. You can actually see how far something is away, and it tells you live. Okay, so I knew that my outer was right at the 2-point mile, so I knew I was pretty close. And so these are things you can do. Okay, we want to just kind of go out maybe just a mile. You can kind of even draw, and then you can draw a separate square. So there's a lot of really neat things that you can do on Google Maps. That's why I'm having you do it as part of your project. So what you will do is you will pick an anchor location and address, find that, and then start. And you're going to start as a team looking at different. You're going to map churches. You're going to find where are the local churches in the area. You're going to find a good number of those that are nearby, because you're going to need to be conversing with those pastors. And later down the road, when we talk about building community partnerships, you will contact churches that are on your list. So you're mapping them now. You will be contacting them later. And also we're picking things like shopping centers and schools, because your church, if you're doing a more of a kind of a launch service type approach, you may need a place for 150 people to gather. And so shopping centers and schools often have buildings for rent and that sort. So you're mapping all these kind of areas. Now there's, what you can do on Google Maps is limited because you're not there, you're not walking around, you're not getting to know the people that these lines and things represent. But it's a good place to start and at the beginning of your perspective. So I'll make sure you guys are good on that throughout this week if you need any help kind of figuring that out. It's pretty self-explanatory. You can share once you create your map. You just, I need to do that. You kind of click this share thing. It's just like in a Google Drive. You share it and make sure your teammates have access to this, including myself. So you do the whole share thing, click done, and it's good to go. So I just kind of want to show what that looks like.
One quick thing too, and I'm going to share in chapel, but if you can find the people who are trying to do something positive in their community, and I'll just give you a quick example. We mapped out all the points of interest for international people in High Point. Well, there's a group in High Point that's working and focusing on food deserts, and so they called and said, "Hey, Mike, I've heard you have all the places in High Point where international people shop." I said, "I do." I said, "Would you be willing to share that with us?" And we in turn would be willing to share some resources. So I gave them the map. I offered them something. And then they have actually helped over at the gathering over where Albertson Road used to be, to help with some of the gardens they're doing and things like that. So find people that you have valuable, try to make yourself valuable, and then swap out valuable information. You don't have the same purposes. Their purpose has nothing to do spiritually, but yours does. But you do have a common interest.
Recording stopped.
So find those common interests. One of the things I'll just go ahead and say, one of the things I tell folks today is find people who love the community. I mean, if that's one thing you share, and those people can open up a lot of doors.